الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الصلاة والسلام على رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم وعلى آله وصحبه من والاه. Uh, Good evening, brothers and sisters. We are here another week to continue in our reading of a book written by Imam Dawud Walid. It's called Towards Sacred Activism. And this is actually our first week uh, reading chapter 1. And last week, you may recall that we took time to kind of get to know Imam Walid. For those who are not familiar with him, we talked a bit about his background, his training, and his activism. And we also had a chance to take a look at the introduction to this particular reading, this book that we are covering together. And so tonight, inshallah, we will be going over the first chapter. And the first chapter addresses the topic of justice. And the title of this chapter is, What is Justice? What is Justice? So inshallah, I'll give a brief overview. The chapters are very short. This particular first chapter is just 2 pages or 4 pages if you count front and back. And so inshallah, let's jump into it. So first off, Imam Walid starts off by recognizing that anytime the scholars of the past would address a topic, the first thing that they would do is to establish the context of the conversation, the context of the topic itself. And in this case, the topic at hand is justice. So when we talk about sacred activism, really what we're talking about is amal bil maruf, or the establishment of justice, wa nahi anil munkar, and the forbidding of munkar, or oppression, or any kind of injustice. And so he starts off by saying that our scholars from the past, whenever they would elucidate on a topic, the first thing they would do is to define the topic at hand. And so he gives a brief definition, which is offered by the Oxford Dictionary, that says that justice is defined as the quality of being fair or reasonable, and can relate to the administration of law and authority in maintaining it. Its etymology derives from Latin and relates to righteousness, uprightness, and equity. Justice is associated with the term just, meaning to be morally right and fair. So Oxford gives a very good effort to give a broad definition of justice. But we as believers, we have a perspective of justice that is not based on, as Oxford put it, the administration of law. When you look at the administration of law, we have to study the origin of law. And from a religious standpoint, the origin of law for us, we know, is the source, which is Allah, the creator, al-Khaliq. He's the one who creates everything and gives it its law. So the second definition, or the one from our deen, justice, or al-adl, or al-adala in Arabic, those words carry relative closeness in meaning to what was offered by the Oxford Dictionary. He says that as people commonly come to know the meanings of things by their opposites, one of our scholars from the past, Ar-Razi, he begins the definition of justice by identifying its opposite. So he doesn't directly go into the establishment of justice. He first establishes what injustice is, and thereby putting it in context, the opposite of that is justice. So he defines what is oppression, what is tyranny, and then in an indirect way begins to show the layers of meaning of what is justice. And then he says a direct initial meaning of justice in Arabic is also equality. Moreover, justice has a relationship to something being tantamount or corresponding to another. So justice in this context is in relationship to other things or other parts of creation. When these creations of Allah are functioning within their intended purpose, that is justice. That is a sense of justice. And anytime a creation of Allah goes beyond or transgresses the limits and extends beyond the limits set by Allah, by definition, this is injustice, that they've committed an injustice first and foremost against Allah, against themselves, and against other parts of creation. He also quotes a scholar of the past, Al-Bayhaqi, who was a very famous Shafi'i scholar, who takes it a step further. And he says that justice, or Al-Adl, is one of the beautiful names of Allah. So when we talk about what is justice, we are talking about Allah himself directly, because he is the source of justice. There is no justice outside of the limits set by Almighty Allah himself, Azza wa Jal himself. And any other definition of justice is no, unless it directly relates back to the limits set by Allah, then this is not a true definition of justice. He goes on to say that when matters operate within their general parameters as Allah Azza wa Jal made them to operate, and those matters are justly balanced. Likewise, as defined by many scholars such as Raghib al-Asbahani, radiyallahu an, wrongness or oppression or dhulm exists when things are placed in other than their specified positions. So again, going back to the concept that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when he creates a thing, he also gives it its limits. And whenever they extend beyond those limits, it is committing an injustice. And there are many examples throughout the Quran where Allah Azza wa Jal explains these concepts. And one of them can be found in Surah Ar-Rahman, the 55th surah of the Quran, which reads, A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, Ar-Rahman, Alam al-Quran, Khalaq al-Insan, Allamahu al-Bayan, Ash-Shamsu wal-Qamaru bihusban, wal-Najmu wal-Shajaru yasjudan, والسماء رفعها ووضع الميزان ألا تطغوا في الميزان. And in translation, Ar-Rahman, the most merciful, who taught the Quran, created man and taught him eloquence. The sun and the moon move by the precise calculation, and the stars and trees prostrate, and the heaven he raised and imposed the balance, that you not transgress the balance, and establish weight and justice, and do not make deficient the balance. So in this, these first 9 ayat of Surah Ar-Rahman, Allah points out that he is Ar-Rahman, he is the merciful, and he created man and gave man eloquence, taught man eloquence. He also created the sun, the moon, and the stars and trees, and the heavens and the earth, and gave it all a balance. And he says in ayat number 8, "Ala taghaw fil mizan," that we should not transgress within the balance. So this is the establishment of justice. And he says to establish weight in justice and do not make deficient the balance. So do not, that we should not transgress or withhold, but we should give each part of creation, including ourselves, our rights. And so this is the definition, one of the definitions that is given, as I mentioned, by Bayhaqi. And there are other ayats, and there's so many, we could go on and on, just speaking about the Quran and the meanings of these ayat. But to move forward, he says that those who make equals with Allah, those are the ones who replace belief with disbelief. So anytime a person makes any equivalent with Allah, this is transgression. This is a form of transgression, and ultimately, it is the greatest form of transgression or oppression in Islam, which we recognize as shirk, right? Or making someone an equal or a rival to Allah, or ascribing another partner to Allah, which there is no God except Allah. Of course, we understand that. So the biggest establishment of justice is to establish Tawheed. This is how the basis of justice for Muslim is in the establishment of Tawheed. And that is I think the most important point that I took from this chapter, which is that justice itself emanates from Tawheed, the belief in the oneness of Allah. And that is the biggest truth and the biggest justice that we can establish. And from that, all other justice emanates from. And unless a person establishes the rububiyah, or the lordship or kingship of Allah, there's no true sense of justice. He also goes on to say that Allah Azza wa Jal, mighty and sublime, is also known as al-haq, or the truth, and that Allah is the doer of what is correct and what is right. And he creates everything and gives it its rights. So when we talk about justice and acting within the limits set by Allah, essentially what we're discussing are the rights that the creation of Allah has been bestowed, and those are the hukuk, or the rights. And Allah Azza wa Jal is al-haq. He is the truth. He is the one that establishes the truth and the rights for all of creation. And he goes on to say that that those rights should be extended to human beings from other than themselves. Excuse me, let me rephrase that. Such rights being extended to human beings from other than themselves is a position articulated by political theorists and philosophers other than Muslims as well. So he goes into a short discussion about how in society governments also play a role in establishment of rights and justice. And he takes the example of Thomas Jefferson, one of the founding forefathers in this country. And there's a line in the Declaration of Independence that says, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." And those of us who, which pretty much all of us have at some point probably heard these words, but I find it interesting that even in the Declaration of Independence, they recognize and acknowledge that these rights are endowed by their creator, by the creator himself. And so these are some of the highlights that I wanted to bring out in this first chapter. I don't want to be too long-winded. I would rather or prefer that we spend most time in discussion. So I think I will stop there, inshallah. Hopefully I did it enough to establish what justice is, how it's defined in this chapter, and gave enough that we could, inshallah, have a discussion about justice in terms of how it will relate to society and to individuals. والآخر ودعوانا إن الحمد لله رب العالمين والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.